right, good morning. My name is Katherine Huddle with the Carmel Public Library, and I would like to welcome you back to our virtual visiting author series. Many thanks go to our foundation and guild members for planning these special author events for our community. Today we have an exciting announcement. Turn the Page Bookstore in Westfield, our book-selling partner for these events, is giving away a free copy of today's book, You Belong Here Now by Dianna Rostad. Will you be the first person to stop by and claim that free copy? Don't fret if it's not you, because Turn the Page is graciously offering 20% off You Belong Here Now for the next week, and all you have to do is mention our Facebook Live event. Thank you so much to Turn the Page for this amazing offer for all of our viewers. Please watch the library's Facebook page, Instagram, and Twitter accounts for announcements on future virtual author events. Today, I'm so pleased to welcome to the Carmel Clay Public Library author Dianna Rostad. Dianna was born and raised in the Pacific Northwest. Her parents and extended family come from the ranches of Montana and the farms of Arkansas. Dianna raised 3 kind human beings, and when they began to test their wings, she took to writing with a passion, completing the Southern Methodist University Writer's Path program in 2009. A favorite task of her creative endeavors is the discovery and research of people and places where her novels are set, and that really comes across in today's book. She's traveled extensively to pursue the last artifacts of our shared history and breathe life, truth, and hope into her novels. Now living in Florida, Dianna continues to write big-hearted novels for wide audiences everywhere. And if you have a question for Dianna, make sure that you get it into the comments section today, and we'll get you an answer live during our Q&A portion today. So Dianna, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. Hello, Carmel, Indiana.
And for those who have not yet had a chance to pick up You Belong Here Now, we can see the beautiful cover right behind you on display. Could you give our viewers a little bit of a brief overview of this book?
You bet. The story is set in 1925 Montana, and it begins when these 3 brave kids from New York board this orphan train headed west. You've got a tiny girl who won't talk, an Irish boy who's lost his whole family to Spanish flu, and a dangerous boy from Hell's Kitchen. So these kids get on this train, and stop after stop, they're just not chosen. You know, Charles from Hell's Kitchen is so big for his age, and he's covered in bruises, and he just looks like he's trouble. And Patrick is Irish, and, you know, back then, everyone was prejudiced against the Irish. They thought they were lazy and on the dole. And then little Opal won't even talk, and she's so tiny, she can't even carry a bucket. So, you know, they don't get chosen, and so they're headed, you know, sort of towards the end of the line, and it's one evening, and it's dark, and Charles turns to Patrick and he says, "Look, I can't go back to New York. I'm jumping off this train." So these 2 boys get up to jump off the train. And lo and behold, little Opal follows him. She insists she's going too. And so these kids jump off the train in Montana, and they end up on this ranch with Nara. Nara is about 33. She's living with her parents, and she's really kind of brisk and hardened. You know, she's trying to get her father to hand over that really large cattle operation. And he doesn't think that anybody's going to listen to a woman in 1925 Montana, though. So, you know, she's had to scrub away every bit of her femininity to rise up in that male-dominated world. And, you know, she dresses like a man, she walks like a man, and she talks like a man. So when she sees these kids, she wants nothing to do with them. So, you know, she doesn't want to get caught in the kitchen, you know, wiping noses and making sandwiches. So what she does is she works them without mercy, dark to dark, hoping they'll run off, but they don't. They buck up and they show spirit, and it really surprises Nara. So despite herself, she begins to take to these kids. And, you know, when Charles is jailed for freeing this band of wild horses that were rounded up for slaughter, they discover something about his past. And so Nara and the family do something rather unthinkable in order to save him. And that's kind of the summary of the story.
Can you give us some information on how you came to write about this time period and about this location and about orphan trains?
Yeah, you bet. You know, the inspiration for the storyline came back in 2007. I was reading this online article about the orphan train, and I was like, whoa, I'd never heard of this before. I was astounded. Was I not listening in class? You know, it was a 75-year program. I was just so shocked I didn't know about it. So I got to researching it, and I saw all of these amazing photos with these kids, sort of peering out of trains and lined up on platforms, and they had this amazing, brave and determined look in their face, and it was astounding. Some of these kids were so young, and they were just going off into the West all by themselves. And I guess, that look of hope and determination I saw on their faces reminded me of a caseload of kids I used to manage in South Central Los Angeles. You see, my first big girl job was managing a caseload of youthful offenders, and it was basically my job to get them employed. And so I would, when they paroled, I'd pick them up and take them out and get them clothes and take them to job interviews and help them write in applications and follow-up letters. And when they would come to me in the youth authority wanting to be on my program, they came to me with that same look of hope and determination. So I knew when I saw those kids, on the trains and train platforms, I just felt like I was the right person to tell this story. And then,
And we mentioned a little bit in your introduction as well, Dianna, about your path to writing. But I was hoping also you could share more information about what led you here to writing in general.
Yeah, my kids were getting older, and I was always a great reader of historical fiction. And so my husband turned to me and he said, "Why don't you try writing?" And I thought, I'd kind of been thinking about it already. And so it just took that little bit of encouragement. And boy, from there, I just dove headlong. I went to conferences. I signed up for the creative writing program. I took Publishers Marketplace, and that's the clearinghouse for all of the deals that get bought and sold in the industry. So I really just went all in, and I stalked my agent. I had her on a Google alert, Marley Rusop, because it's so hard to break into the industry, and it's you have to really have some tough skin, some dragon scales, because I'll tell you, some of the questions that I got asked by well-meaning friends and family over the years are, "Are you done with that book yet?" I'm like,
It takes as long as it takes.
I know. Or, "Hey, when can I buy that book?" And I'm like, soon, So you have to have a lot of faith in yourself in order to make it. And I'm proud of myself. I did it. So, and it did take a lot of work. So, and here I am.
And for this wonderful debut, I was hoping you could share with our viewers some information about what your writing process looks like and about the time frame for this book.
Okay, so you mean how long it took to write the book? It took a long time, because you see, even though I knew my storyline and I knew my characters, I just didn't know where to set it. And so my father came to Christmas one year and he brought all of these, photos of the old family ranches in Montana. And it just broke open this whole big wide world where I could finally see my characters inside. And so from there, it seemed so natural to base so many of the characters on family. My grandfather, he sang and wrote songs. And so a lot of the songs in the book you'll hear, like Little Footprints in the Snow was a song that a lot of folks sang back then about a little girl who went missing in a blizzard. And the old Side Hill Gouger is some mythical creature. It was kind of a legend that the parents used to keep the kids inside at night. So cute stuff like that. And, it took a long time to write it. In order to break into the industry, you have to just be willing to, really attach to the village style of writing, because it takes so many people to write a book that goes out to a wide audience. It really does. If you're writing a small literary piece but I will always want to try to hit a wide audience, all ages, all genders. So.
And I definitely think this could also, not just adult historical fiction, but teens, for a young adult audience. You have 2 or 3 characters in here too that are very relatable for teens.
Oh, I hope so. Yeah.
So going through that writing process for you, there's some difficult content in here. These are orphans who have, and maybe not all orphans. That was one thing that I discovered. I love researching about the orphan trains, and that up to a quarter of the children that were on the trains, they weren't technically orphans. They had two parents still living, but for certain circumstances, they ended up on the trains. And sometimes of their own free will, they just say, I need to get out of here. I'm in a bad situation and I want a fresh start. But for all that, we also have talk of Indigenous people. We have a character named Jim, who is a ranch hand on the Stewart's farm, who is of the Cheyenne people. And we hear of what his people went through and continue to go through, and the discrimination facing him, and how that affects Nara and the other characters in the book. We also have the discrimination against Irish Catholics and Patrick, which is so hard to read, imagining that against a young child. So were there any scenes or characters or dialogue that were just really hard for you to get into?
Not really. I don't think, a lot of them are very emotional for sure. Like when Charles had to take Opal and put her in that car. That was a heartbreaking part of the book for me to write, for sure. Or the part where, Nara has to finally accept that, she and Jim, because of their ethnicities and cultures, can never be together. And she will never be happy, because of, well, not happy with the man, married, that will never happen for her, So those are some really, kind of moments. And there's a lot of moments in the book that are just, based on my childhood. Like, when they're under that train bridge, I actually did that when I was a kid, get under those train trestles. I mean, it literally feels like every party is going to shake apart when that train goes over. I cannot even hardly describe it, but, or, falling off the back of a horse and getting the wind knocked out of you, Charles has this really big ornery Appaloosa that he's, tasked with, trying to learn how to ride him, and Charge is not making it easy on him. So
I love the use of the horses in this book. And even if you're not a horse person, the contrast between the children who are strong and willful and they persevere, and you have the horses. What is your family or your personal history with horses? Because it's detailed. It's not overwhelmingly detailed if you're not a horse person, but there's some great information in here.
Oh, for sure. My family back in Washington, my aunt runs a horse farm, and for many years she bred Arabians. And so they always had all kinds of horses around, and they rescued horses too. So, I grew up, whenever we'd go back home, I'd ride horses and things like that. And so a lot of that stuff is in the book. And my Aunt Marilyn really helped me with the horse scenes. And making sure everything was okay. We still managed to get girdle straps in there. It's supposed to be girth straps. Somebody corrected. And she texted me and said, "Oh my goodness." And we had a good laugh about that. But what do? You can never be 100% on a book. So
So are any of the characters in You Belong Here Now based on real people from your life? Like sometimes we do tend to steep even little certain aspects of our friends and family into there, the good aspects and the bad aspects sometimes.
Oh, so many characters in here were based on family, because setting it in Montana, I couldn't even help myself, and Nara started out as my, the namesake for my maternal grandmother, Nara. But she quickly morphed into my eldest headstrong daughter, who was just a natural leader. And she was all about the rules. In fact, Jessica went into HR, so perfect for her. And, of course, Charles in the book only has one rule, and that's don't get caught. And so these two characters butt heads in the book, and they sort of, I think they both come to realize that justice isn't always something you can get by rules and law, and that only love can provide justice sometimes. So that's kind of where they meet.
Do you have a favorite character from the book?
Oh, it's really hard. I mean, I love all of them. I really do. And it was hard to be hard on my characters because they were family members. I don't know. I think Opal is kind of a favorite. And, Charles, obviously, I loved that character to death. He was based on my son, who was 17 at the time, who was really tender on the inside, but a fierce protector of his siblings. Of course, he didn't beat anybody bloody in protecting them, because, he didn't have the same background as Charles has, coming from the streets, But gosh, it would be hard to say I loved them all.
I really liked Mama Stewart, the mother of this family, that they had had a horrible family tragedy long ago in the past, and was still healing from those wounds, trying to, and just taking in these children with open arms. And there's a family in town that they have family drama with and a long history with, and seeing that character, it's Ella,
Ella.
who's very unlikable, very, very well scripted as an unlikable character. And just one thing after another, the punches keep coming from her. And I really want to see this person meet an unfortunate end. And but Mama is such a great character too. You can see her sitting there in the kitchen, and there's a scene with her and Nara too. And it's so hard for women of 2020, 2021 to read about Nara's experience on the farm, where she's so experienced. This is her life, this is her passion and her career. And they also have such a close family. And when the children come into the picture, she's in her early 30s. She's never pictured herself as a mother. And thinking about how she asks her mom, how do you do this day in and day out in the kitchen? You're cooking, you're cleaning, it's the same thing every day. And she said she would never want to take up that motherly role, for the kitchen felt like a dim prison. Over the last year during quarantine, I know a lot of people can commiserate with that. And a woman can't raise kids and cattle at the same time. Simple as that. And that really stuck with me. And then later on, her father, Pop Stewart, says, you don't need to be out tending cattle. That's why I employ men. You're going to get wrinkled working in the sun all day, and then no man will want you. And this is 1925, and that they want her married off, and that the prospects in town are not great. They are curmudgeonly ranch hands and farmers, and it's really hard to see her evolve through this experience to where she can get to a point in the book where she can put her hand up on the shoulder of one of these kids and try to offer them some comfort and see her grow, especially with all that she's been through and all that they faced throughout this, and how this experience just changes her whole worldview. She's such a great character.
Yeah, she is a great character. I like her a lot. She's really a strong, tough cookie. And, of course, back then she would have had to be, to do all that hard work, the work of a man, and, try to get her father to, hand over that cattle operation to her, and, just falling in love with, that Cheyenne ranch hand, and knowing that, it could never happen. It's heartbreaking. So.
And with the past, we mentioned 2020, which I try not to think about too much these days. Did you have any writer's block? Did you have a hard time writing or reading as a reader during the pandemic?
It's funny. I did have a hard time concentrating on books. I felt very anxious at the beginning, and I couldn't focus on writing. I couldn't focus on reading. And I know a lot of folks did have that problem. I heard that from a lot of folks. And so it was a tough time for sure,
When you do get into those situations where you're stuck, and even if you're just mentally drained and you can't focus, what keeps you going? What keeps you motivated when you're writing?
It's research, because I love it so much. All I have to do is just crack open my notes, and I'm right back there in that moment. I like to do a lot of on-site research for sure. I combed through all the historical societies in Montana. I went out there and I walked around in the scrub, and it's the funny thing about research is it always leads to more research. And so, and when I found, because when I was looking at, okay, what are all the flora and fauna in 1925 Montana? I came across this Pryor Mountain Range band of wild horses. And I was like, whoa, I didn't know we had wild horses. I grew up out west. I didn't know this. And they're beautiful. And I saw this blue roan, and they're so gorgeous. They look like something straight out of Hollywood. So I had to have that blue roan in my book. So, but things like that they just get me right in my moment and right back into my story.
When I was reading this too, of course, naturally there are comparisons with Orphan Train by Christina Baker Kline, but it also, as I was reading, reminded me of William Kent Krueger a little bit, and just the tone and language. And then I went onto your website and stalked you on social media and discovered that you are a big fan also of William Kent Krueger. So who are you reading right now?
Well, I just read Lightning Strike by William Kent Krueger. One of the really cool things about being an author is I got an ARC, which is an advanced reader's copy of Lightning Strike. And it's phenomenal. I mean, he's just really at the top of his game. So, and it's sort of the prequel to the whole Cork O'Connell series, but it's written very much like his This Tender Land or Ordinary Grace. It's kind of a standalone too. And so, gorgeous novel. Great ending. You'll never guess how it ends. So
And with You Belong Here Now, the boys in the novel, the two orphan boys, they share a bunk on the ranch, and there are some books there, and they pick up these books, and they are Zane Grey novels. And this is an actual author who wrote westerns. Have you read Zane Grey novels?
I have, and I didn't read all of them. I parsed some of them, but Purples of the Writers of the Purple Sage is one of them. And I actually have somebody gifted me an original copy of that novel. And so it's one of my oldest, most loved novels. And so things like that just brought a lot of flavor into the book. And of course, Charles reads that in the book because he would have read things like that. And those are the stories that his father, when he had a father before he died in the war, used to read to Charles. And so Charles grows up dreaming of becoming a cowboy. And it's all planted in there from all those stories that his father read him. Yeah.
It's so hard to think about this time period too, that we're in between wars, and we think if he's maybe 17, 18, knowing what's coming up in the future, that he's going to be a tough cookie. He's gone through a lot, and there's more coming.
There is.
There's
Yeah.
a sequel in here somewhere.
I know I've gotten some fan mail asking for a sequel, a couple of them actually, and my dad is also very much in favor of doing that. So, and I have written out some storylines. So we'll see. I don't know. I would love to write those characters again. When I had to, write the end, I was so like, bummed.
Especially when Opal is so young. Is she under 10 in this book?
Yeah, she's 8 years old. Yeah.
It's so hard to imagine these days that's a second grader going through this.
Yeah. Yeah. Scary.
When you were working on this book, do you have any writing quirks? Sometimes I hear from people, I only write between 12 and 4 a.m., or I still use a typewriter, or I only listen to a certain type of music.
I don't know that I have a quirk other than the typical things. I have to get my desk cleared off because clutter is noise in my head. And I do have this huge whiteboard because I'm visual. And so I'll, get up there and write, scenes. I'll do a real good, plot line and make sure that it's going to be an enjoyable story, because I think that's really important. It's one of the first things I do. But one thing I do that I know not a lot of writers do is that before I even write a summary or a synopsis or one line of my book is I will write out a log line for my book. And it's just one sentence of what the story's about. And what that does for me is it helps me write a really strong outline. So I can sit down and write, 12 pages of turn by turn instructions so that when I sit down and write this story, I know where I'm going and I can just focus on things like the landscape, the emotional tension and, the really beautiful bits of writing. And so kind of breaking those two things apart by doing the outline and then writing the book really helps me a lot. So
it comes across, it's so evident, the sense of time and of place here. If you've never been out to Montana, you can taste the dust and it's grit in your eyes, and it's very visceral there. And especially there's a scene where the Stewart family, they're very financially, they get an automobile. All sorts of chaos ensues after this car comes home. But it just is thinking of these characters and the kids going for a ride in the car for the first time. It really does take you there into the early 20s.
Oh, for sure. And the wind in my book is a character. And I can tell you, I grew up in Eastern Washington, and that wind in the wintertime, it gets so cold and so dry because it comes down from Canada. And it just desiccates you, and I bandy it around in the book about this chap butt thing, but it's a serious issue. I can tell you, it hurts.
Well, do you have a character that you personally identify with the most?
I think, Nara and well, not so much. Well, I think Mama. I identify with Mama and Opal and a little bit with Nara too. Yeah. And I loved writing these scenes where Charles really beat the tar out of people. I really got way
It
too
was
much pleasure.
deeply satisfying as a reader. It was very satisfying. They had it coming. I
Oh, I
don't
know.
have any violence on it. The library does not have any violence, but
I
it's so
know.
hard, especially knowing the history of what happened to some of the children who were adopted during the orphan train time period. That we see a lot of, especially the strapping young lads, the young men taking away basically for indentured servitude, that they are labor on farms, that they're being used for free labor, and that some of the young women especially were physically, sexually abused, emotionally abused. There was a lot of abuse here. So it's hard. I know there's always a lot of controversy over, was the orphan train situation, did it end up being a good thing for a lot of these kids in the long run? And it's so hard to say what would have happened to them if they had stayed in New York, versus where they ended up. But we did not want to see Opal come to harm in any way, and having Charles step in on her behalf. And it's hard. And as an adult, and people looking the other way while this is going on, and she's so little.
Yeah, it is hard, and that's what he says. He says, look, she's so little. How can she possibly defend herself, And by his way of thinking, fists rule. He grew up on the streets. It's, your fists are your survival. And so he really has to, when he gets to Montana, he still doesn't feel safe. And he's using those old skills. And so he has to learn how to rein it back a little, because when he beats somebody up, he frightens people. There comes a point in the book where they don't know if they can save him. He might just be too broken.
And it's crazy to think that we sent these kids off on trains, and some of them went straight into work, some of them went into unsavory situations, and that nowadays when we have children transition through the system, that there's so many, we know so much more, and we have so many more resources to offer them to help along that journey. It's hard to see how far we've come in 100 years.
We do, but there's all kinds of lovely stories too about people who really wanted children, because back then in the 19th century especially, we lost a lot of kids from scarlet fever, and so people were left childless, and so there really was some good true adoption out there too. So it's really a mixed bag. But
it's hard to think about how hard the adoption process, rightfully so, is these days in many ways to protect children, and to make sure that they are in safe, loving homes. But you show up to the train depot and you sign some papers, and you can walk away with this child.
Yeah. And you don't know what you're getting, especially in the older kids, because, they really did run in gangs, and they slept together in little balls huddled up into corners. There's all kinds of lovely pictures on the internet that are just heartbreaking to see. So you can imagine, they were very, focused on, getting these kids into some good situations. But the history of the orphan train is interesting because it's almost like, the railroad itself created the problem, because back in the mid 19th century, the railroad was just all building this thing out. And of course, there was nothing out west. And so what did they need? They needed people to go west. So they started advertising in Europe and, and the whole world. And so they brought in all of these immigrants, like 4.3 million people they brought in. And of course, they didn't have money to go west, a lot of them. And so they stayed. And it really caused all of this overcrowding. And it actually caused a lot of the homelessness of these children, believe it or not. So it's just so funny that they put them on a train and send them out west. I mean, it's interesting the way these, these unintended consequences, work out. But, the railroad itself did create a lot of homelessness and a big influx of immigration, because they literally put posters out all over the place, free land of opportunity, and they really came. So,
and it's also interesting with Charles in his situation. His mother was an alcoholic, and we have Prohibition era, and we have an older son of the Stewart family show up at the ranch during the course of the book, and has also he has a flask on him, and Charles mentions, he's like, you people act like it's illegal out here, and well, actually it is. It's in, and you have a character in the book who is making her own hooch in her house with her many children to financially support them to get by. And so much of the book, when you think about how hard this time period was, is just survival and what people do to survive.
It really truly is. It really is. Especially out there, there's nothing in, you've only got yourself out in rural Montana, and a lot of the attitudes of folks out there, that's very true. People who are in, very low density rural areas won't really value government intervention of any kind, because they don't see a lot of it. When they get taxed, they don't get a lot of that money. It goes elsewhere. So a lot of those attitudes are in the book too. So.
Well, I'm really curious to see where you go from here. Can you share any information with us on what you're working on right now or what you have coming up next?
Yeah, you bet. So I think, what readers can expect from me, and here's kind of my author's mantra, and it's this: I write big-hearted stories for wide audiences. And what that means is that I will always take my readers on epic journeys. I love journeys. I don't know if it was watching Pippi Longstocking, those old poorly dubbed, she had that great ship. So I love that. But I love the idea of, epic journeys and landscapes really being, rooted in that place and time. And I love to have children in the book. They remind us of our, our joy, and to be present, and our kinder natures, and and a big wide cast of characters, all ages, all genders, so that everyone will have someone to root for. Yeah. And then for my next book, I can give you a little sneak peek, and that is it's set in 1900 San Francisco, and it's basically a True Grit meets The Secret Garden, and that's all I'm gonna say.
Wow.
Yeah. That'll be fun.
Big fan of both of those. So I'm really interested to see how those come together. That's exciting. Do you have any idea when we might see that hitting shelves?
I don't. I don't.
And it's so hard, and it's so interesting. With this book, it came out towards, we're hoping is the tail end of the pandemic, but don't quote me on that.
I know.
So how is this book, with your virtual book tour, have you had any chances for in-person visits, or what's it been like releasing this book at this period in time for you, and knowing it's coming and seeing the pandemic unfold?
Well, the release of it was, on time, but my, sort of virtual tours and my in-person tours had to be delayed for COVID. And so now I'm finally getting out there and doing in-person events. And so I'll be all over Florida. I'll be at, festivals all over the Midwest and the South. And then I'm going to Montana. I hope to hit San Diego and Phoenix. And I'll be in Woodside, California, where a lot of this book was written. It's a huge equestrian community, Woodside, California, in the coming weeks. So if people want to know where I'm going, they can always get on my website, diannarostad.com. And I've got an appearances section there. So.
Perfect. It's exciting to get back out on the road and see viewers and readers in person.
Yeah, it fulfills me, because I get, every reader brings a different take to the book, and I'm always so interested in their take. And so, yeah, I just love it. So talking to readers.
And it's such an important book too, thinking that for the time period that most of the Orphan Train orphans are no longer with us, and that we're getting to that point where we have a handful of people left who have firsthand accounts. So continuing these stories and telling their tales is so important.
It is. It is.
So I have a question for you about social media, because I saw that you are active on Instagram and Twitter, you're on Facebook, and that takes a lot of time, selling yourself as an author and getting your work out there, your baby, your product is out there. But for Goodreads and Amazon reviews, have you been snooping on your reviews, and you hop onto Goodreads sometimes and peek? And how do you handle anything that may not be 5 stars?
Oh, I think a book is not for everyone. And so I don't have many of those negative reviews, but and a lot of times I get feedback in 5-star reviews, and so I take that to heart. I don't get upset about it. I think, okay, that's something I want to think about next time I write a book. So, but I don't get upset about it, and I don't tend to dig down and read any of those things. I keep an eye on how many I have and that sort of thing and what my rating is, but much more than that, I try not to read them because, it just, and I'm not one of those authors that, will send out a 1-star rating on my Facebook and trash it. I think that's awful. That's just, no.
I've thought about a Goodreads for readers, where you list what you're reading in your reviews, and then the authors can come in and rate the readers.
Yeah. And I do tend to keep my Goodreads updated because I use it to catalog all the books I read. So, and my research stuff is on there too. So it's a great tool because, you can't keep all the books you read, but you want to remember them. And, I try to read 45 books every year. So I set that goal on Goodreads for myself, and
Yeah.
you'll see me get panicked and start reading
Binge reading.
slender books towards the end.
I read this children's picture book the other day. I'm counting it. It counts. Well, you have so much experience now over the past decade plus, and with this book, do you have any advice from what you've been through for someone who's just getting started or maybe just trying to get their first book published?
Yeah. So I think, read in your genre and review for writers, really help them out so that when it comes your time, you'll have some favors to call in, and, really be active on social media. I think Publishers Marketplace is something you have to have, and you have to take the daily deals and the publisher's lunch and really read that and know, who's selling what to whom. That will really help you. So yeah, and, get a tight log line around your story before you start writing it, or I promise you, you will write down rat holes and it will take much longer. So, because I've done that and it doesn't work.
That is definitely some good advice there for our authors in the Carmel community.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed the audiobook version of this, which we do have from the library, and hearing Nara's voice come to life, and also the accents. It's so hard when you're reading to try to shift into Patrick's Irish accent. So it was really well done too. How was your process working with this? Was this the first time this is your debut having an audiobook done for the first time?
Oh, for sure. And I listened to it when I was in my car and I loved it. I mean, she did all the voices so well. And, Patrick comes out and Jim comes out, and all of the characters just have the most amazing, she's got such variety. And it's one of the reasons that I wanted Courtney Patterson to do the audiobook. So she did phenomenal. Yeah.
Well, I'm just curious about your reading interest personally. So over the last year with the pandemic, we have seen a lot of interest in ebooks just because so many libraries had to close temporarily in person. It's just ease of use. Are you an ebook person, a print book person, both, or never an ebook person?
Oh, many years ago, I was pretty much a book person, print, but, I injured my wrist and my elbow playing tennis. And so, the ergonomics of a Kindle book are just amazing, especially when you go on travel. You can be in an airport and download a book real quick. And so I do some of both. Yeah, some of both. I'm not a purist, and it's just easier when you're in your bed. And, if you wake up in the middle of the night and you want to try to get back to sleep and you don't want to bother anybody, you can just turn on your ebook. So I don't know.
I will admit, over the past year, I've reached the point of slothness in my life, so lazy that I have the print book on a shelf. I am on the couch or in bed. I will get the ebook on my phone just to read it there, so I don't have to get up. It's so easy. It's so nice. And if you want, someone recommends it, like the William Kent Krueger book, you hop on your iPad and it's there within a minute. So it is everything else.
It's so easy. But
we do have You Belong Here Now as a digital ebook and a digital audiobook through the library. If you visit our website at carmelclaylibrary.org, you can get those today.
Yay.
Well, is there anything you would like to leave our viewers with about the book? If you could summarize it, one thing you want them to walk away with.
I will always write books that are uplifting and hopeful. I'm not about that, that experience where you read a book and you go, oh, it was so well written, but I feel so depressed. I can't write those books. So my books will have tension, suspense, great plot lines, pacey, but you're never going to leave my books feeling terrible. So there's
The
always
pacing was so well done with this. That is one thing that definitely stood out to me as a reader, that it was very well done.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
And if you have any questions for Dianna this morning, make sure you get those in the comments before we wrap up today. And I love that you love research. During your research for this book, was there anything that you found really interesting that didn't make it into the book?
Yes, there was this one scene and it had to be cut. And this is why I read this old self-published book, and this gentleman, Ray Grenston, knew my grandfather, and it's called Tracks of the Iron Horse. And so this guy was an old railroader. And one of the stories that he passed along, one of the oral histories in there, was about this old, and this forester who, he was like 20 years old, 22. He and his young wife were backpacking up into Montana because he's going to take over for the U.S. Forest Service a piece of forest. And they're in the sheer cliff. And unfortunately, his wife falls down the cliff on her mule and she breaks her neck. And they're out in the middle of nowhere. And so he climbs down there and he sees that there's no hope. Her neck is broken. And so he pulls out this, 45, and he says, honey, go look at that bird over there on the tree. And he shoots her in the head. And it's a terrifying thing to have to do, right? But he doesn't want his young wife to suffer. He knows she's going to die. Her neck is broken. And it just brings to mind, and I did cut it because I wasn't sure if people would understand why I put it in there. And it's because you're so out there, and people do things in situations that you can't imagine that you would have to do. And so, yeah, so that's one of the scenes that didn't make it in. It's very graphic.
It's amazing for this time period too, that so many times during this book, I'm thinking, if you had a cell phone, none of this would have happened. There's so many instances that we think of, especially with runaways and kids just, you have a fight, they run away from home, they come back later that night, they're just in the neighborhood. But in Montana, the neighborhood has coyotes and you can freeze to death. And it's like, man, if we had been 180 to 100 years later, you could have had a cell phone and we could have avoided these 3 chapters. So much heartache and so much difficulty in life, and how grateful we are to have that technology. But even like that, you could have called 911 and asked for help. But
I know.
And they're so remote, with the ranches so far apart.
Yeah, you really, it makes you, you have to do things to survive out there. And I think Charles, makes, the comment at some point when they're having to round up those wild horses that, he thought leaving Hell's Kitchen, he'd never have to do anything horrible again. But, having to round up those horses, he felt like a predator, just as awful as some of those gangs who used to chase him around in Hell's Kitchen. And so, this is hard. And when the wolves, get shot because they're after Charles, as much as he was terrified that they were going to eat him alive, he hated to see them being shot too. It was just, awful.
That was a very gripping scene. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And I appreciate the comments, the notes that you added to the book too, saying, especially for the treatment of some of the wild horses and the animals, that we know a lot more and we do things a little differently, but these are still issues.
Yeah, the wild horses are in the news right now because they're, the organizations like American Wild Horse Campaign and all of them, they're really trying to keep these horses from being, put on meat trucks, because that's what's happening right now. And it's devastating because, these horses, when they graze our public lands, they don't destroy the seeds to our native grasses in their stomachs the way beef cattle do. And so now they're getting all these horses off this beautiful land of ours and letting, beef cattle, go and, graze. And who knows, that creates, topsoil erosion. I mean, remember the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl, we created part of that problem. And so I just kind of see these things maybe happening again. But it's frustrating because they are so beautiful and so majestic. I mean, you can just Google wild horse and you'll see so many amazing photographs. There's so many folks out there who are photographing them and just making people aware that they're there. So, because when I started to do my research, I had no idea we had wild horses out there. So it just takes people knowing what's going on, I think. So, yeah.
Well, do you have anything you'd like to share with our viewers to promote before we head out today?
My goodness. I just would like to say that I'm so grateful to my family. And I just really couldn't have written this book without them. There was so much family history that went into the making of this book. And my father in particular was so instrumental. He helped me edit the book. He helped inspire the setting. And then he shared his bookshelf with me, all his Montana writers, Ivan Doig, Larry Watson. So just a special thank you to all my family, my aunts who, got the old songs of grandpa's off old reels. And my one aunt, all the photos and just the horsey business and lots of help from family. So I just want to thank them all.
And it definitely comes across in the book too, all of that work and dedication, that it feels like a real family, that these are real people that lived, and the sense of time and place, the language, it's spot on.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
I hope everyone gets a chance to pick up You Belong Here Now. I want to thank Dianna so much for joining us today, and to all of our viewers. You Belong Here Now by Dianna Rostad is available in print from the Carmel Clay Public Library, as well as in ebook and digital audiobook formats. You can get those at carmelclaylibrary.org. You can keep up with Dianna on the web at diannarostad.com, and you can sign up for her newsletter on her website. And you can also follow her on social media on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Dianna Rostad. Did you know that you can log You Belong Here Now as a book for our Tales and Tales All Ages Summer Reading Program? This summer, your reading equals donations to the Humane Society for Hamilton County, and you can sign up and find out more at carmel.beanstack.com. Make sure you keep an eye out on the library's social media accounts and our library website for information on future virtual author events, and we'll see you all next time. Thank you so much.